What's up, everybody? This is the Hedge Mage, and I am back again to take another in-depth look at a brand new card that has just recently entered the pauper format with the release of Murders at Karlov Manor. So not only are we going to be taking an in-depth look into the potential this card has and the ways in which that you could play this card in your decks, but we'll also be doing a full breakdown of a brand new brew that I have created for you. So definitely stick around to the end of the video for that. As always, guys, if you would like to support the channel, if you could leave a like on this video and hit that subscribe button, I would greatly appreciate the support. And with that said, let's take a look at the card that we are talking about today. And that card is Snarling Gorehound. For 1 black, we get a dog that has menace, and whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, you surveil 1. So you can look at the top card of your library, and you may either leave it on top or put it into your graveyard. This is a 1/1. So this card I find very, very interesting. The only real criticism that I truly have for the card is that as of right now, I don't really know where it should fit because there's no real established deck, at least not any that I know of, that really wants to play this card. So you may be asking yourself, why am I even making a video about that? Well, that is because its ability has a ton of potential. It's a really, really powerful ability for a common. The ability to surveil 2 every time a creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield is incredibly strong. The downside of this card really is the fact that there's just not a whole lot of support for this type of ability. The big question right now, at least for me, is how do you play this card? The first thing that I have really thought of, at least in a ways in which that you could probably e- abuse the potential that it has, is combo. I think there could be a combo deck at some point that would want to use this because essentially, if you can go infinite and like with a persist combo or something of the sort, uh, you can basically see your entire deck. Just surveil 1 constantly, especially with persist loop, where you just got a free sacrifice outlet and you're just sacrificing a persist creature with persist, and you've played first day of class or something like that. You can basically see your entire deck until maybe you find the card that lets you win. So there is potential there. Right now, the deck that does do a persist loop is Mogwarts. I don't really see this fitting into Mogwarts since we already have a lot of a lot of cards that are, I'm not going to say better than this, but work much better in that deck because they are goblins and they can be tutored with things like Goblin Matron. So I don't really see this as an include on that deck. Definitely that type of combo loop I think would fit in very well with this card since you be able to find your win con, but you already have Dark Dweller Oracle, which basically does the same thing as this card. So as of right now, in terms of this card fitting into a combo deck, there isn't really one that to support this card. That's not to say that there won't be one in the future. There definitely could be. Another place that this could possibly fit in is in some type of Suicide Black, or maybe even an Orzhov Weenie deck that likes to play cards out of the graveyard, or even a Breathless Night deck where like you want to get cards in your graveyard and then reanimate them, or unearth, or use or if they have unearth, for example, just playing them out of your graveyard at least for a turn. And this will allow you to get them into your graveyard since you have the surveil ability. But really, That's kind of where I see it fitting. I mean, if obviously if you guys have any idea of where you think this card should go, definitely let me know in the comment section. I'd be really interested to hear where you would like to brew with this card. Because like I said, I think this card has a lot of potential. It just, as of right now, kind of really lacks the support to really find a home anywhere. That being said, I definitely have a new deck that I've brewed up for you, which I do think can utilize this card pretty well. So yeah, let's take a look at the list. And just a quick little caveat before we get into this full list. I just want to make it abundantly clear that I by no means am trying to argue that this is the best deck for this card. I think the best deck for this card is definitely remains to be seen, and I am really excited to see how and where this card does fit in long term in the format. And it may be something that is just completely forgotten about until it finally re-emerges much later after it's been released. But anyways, let's take a look at the deck that I came up with. So what I decided to do was build a mono black aggro deck. So kind of a mono black weenie. As always, I'll definitely have a link for the full list in the description. So if you want to check it out on your own. But yeah, let's take a look at what we got going on here. I have a very big pile of creatures. Kind of the goal of the deck is going to be trying to play as many creatures as possible, as quickly as possible, and kind of overwhelm our opponents with our mere board presence. So what we got here is I got 4 copies of Butcher Ghoul, which has Undying, so we can get some value from that by chump blocking it and then just returning it to the battlefield, getting us another Surveil trigger. Dregscape Zombie also has an Earth, so we can cast it for 1 mana less. We only get it for a turn if we unearth it. If we decide to put that in our graveyard. I got 4 copies of Ecstatic Awakener. This allows us to uh, make a bigger creature and draw a card, so it kind of fits into 2 slots there. So it is card advantage. It is also a big beater as a 4/4 once we've activated its ability. Uh, 3 Guildsworn Prowlers, which is kind of the optimal card to sacrifice to the Awakener, since then we get to draw 2 cards. 1 copy of Gurmag Angler, since we will be probably filling up our graveyard with a lot of stuff with the Surveil mechanic, so then we can just have a 1 mana 5/5 if we wish. 1 copy of Lotleth Giant, and I got 4 copies of Seeker's Squire, which can also get more cards into our graveyard. Also can be a 2/3 if we need it to be. And 4 copies of our namesake card, our snarling gorehounds. 4 copies of Troll of Khazad-dûm, which helps us smooth out our mana curve as well as putting a card into our graveyard, and 4 copies of Whisper Squad. This this is kind of just kind of lets us get more creatures out of our deck and put them onto the battlefield, get hitting more surveil triggers in the process. And let's see, in our pile of sorceries, I got 2 copies of Chorus of Woe. So this is just a nice buff spell for all of our creatures, giving them an extra power when we attack. 2 copies of Dread Return. This I mostly have just because if we do end up with a lot of creature cards in our graveyard, which we most likely will, either from our creatures being blocked by our opponents or by just putting them in with Surveil, then we can, if we get our Lotleth Giant in the graveyard, we can just Dread Return it and maybe nuke our opponent for the remainder of damage, since hopefully we will be putting a lot of pressure on their life total with just the amount of creatures we have on the board. And then I got 4 copies of Scare Tactics, which is essentially the same as Chorus of Woe, just under a different name. So we got a little bit of redundancy here. I have considered just running also 2 more copies of Chorus of Woe, so we could have 8 copies of this. That is definitely something I might want to try out in as I play with this deck a little bit more. And then 4 copies of You Are Already Dead. This kind of does a couple things for us. It lets us draw cards while also being a nice efficient piece of removal against our opponent creatures, since at some situation when we are going wide with a lot of creatures, they will be forced to kind of chump uh chump block some of our creatures, and they are likely going to try and do it in such a way and block with a creature that is safe from dying from combat damage. But if that happens, we can just pay 1 mana and kill their creature and draw a card, which is I think going to be pretty great for the deck. In our mana base, I got 1 copy of Barren Moor, 1 Bojuka Bog, 11 Swamps, and 2 copies of Witch's Cottage. Beautiful part about Witch's Cottage is it is typed as a swamp. So we can fetch that with our Troll of Khazad-dûm and maybe bring it back either a troll if we have enough mana to cast it, or we can also just bring back any creature that we need, like any of our Ecstatic Awakeners, Guildstorm Prowlers, our Whisper Squads if they got killed before we could use their ability, for example. A lot of stuff that we might want to bring back with the Witch's Cottage, and we can also fetch it, which is pretty great. Then I got 2 copies of Duress in the sideboard. Now this we're going to want to bring in against any sort of grindy mid-range or control matchup, because they are going to have things like sweepers and removal cards. So we want to get those cards out of their hand, or get rid of their counter spells, that sort of thing. And then I got 1 copy of Fairy Macabre. So we're going to bring this in against the combo matchups. It's going to be very hard for them to interact with us with this card. And it also puts a creature into our graveyard, which could be great for ending the game with our Lotleth Giant. So it does a lot of things, can definitely nerf combo matchups, and we can also use it to our own advantage later in the game. And then we also have 4 copies of Guess Verdict, so we're going to bring this in against any sort of Voltron style list. Mostly that's going to be Boggles. So we're going to take out, our target removal and bring in our edicts here. And then we got 4 copies of Mire Triton, which does a couple different things for the deck. This is definitely we're going to be bringing in against the red deck, since we are going to need to be gaining life somehow. And not only does it gain us life, but it also lets us put cards into our graveyard, which can help us out if we're in certain ways, if we're trying to go for either the Lotleth Giant win, or we can also always, then fetch a Witch's Cottage to bring if we put something into the graveyard that we wanted, we can always bring it back, which is, pretty nice. And then 4 copies of Nihil Spellbound is a little bit more of graveyard hate. I would say a pretty bad matchup for this deck is definitely going to be Dimir Terror. So we want to fight that deck as much as possible. I think we would probably have a pretty decent matchup against a lot of combo decks, since they're not going to have a very big board presence, especially things like Tron. You can really probably put a lot of damage through against them. Control is going to be tough though, because basically all the sweepers in the format are going to hit us very, very hard. So there's definitely going to be some tough matchups with this deck, but against slower decks, I think you should be able to put a lot of pressure on your opponent's life total with this. So that's the deck, guys. Let me know what you guys think of it in the comments. Like I said, there's a link in the description if you want to check it out further. And if there's any changes that you would make to this list, I would be very interested in hearing about that. This is very much a bit of a homebrew for me. Um, and I'd also be very interested, like I said previously, where you would like to brew with this card. So yeah, Let me know in the comment section, guys. But that's going to be it for today. I hope everyone's doing well, and I will see you all next time.